Among those who faced further challenges during the pandemic was, of course, people living with disabilities. We spoke with Edward Matthews. He's the CEO of Adapt Community Network about the challenges that community face and things that are being done to help them get through it. Edward, thank you so much. For those who may be unfamiliar with your organization, tell us about it.
Well, Adapt Community Network is 75 years old. We are formerly United Cerebral Palsy of New York City. We provide services to really from birth to the grave for individuals with disabilities and their families. We have early intervention programs, preschools, school-age program, and of course, many, many programs for adults, from work-related programs to the almost 500 people who live with us in supervised and supported basis all the time. And we provide staff for all of those services. So we've been fortunate to still be able to do that even during these times.
We've been talking a lot about COVID-19 and the impact on different aspects of the community for some time now. We want to talk about specifically New Yorkers, New Jerseyans who are living with disabilities. What has been the impact? And be as honest from what you've seen.
The people with disabilities have been impacted differently depending on where they live, who they live with, and what their situation is, just like the general public does. The biggest thing for us is for the children who attend our schools. We provide preschool services to almost 1,200 children throughout the 5 boroughs. And when we broke last March, these children were not having now their educational and clinical services that they were getting throughout the course of the year. These are 3 and 4-year-olds. And at least then we had good knowledge of the children, the services that they needed. And as we scrambled to get technology into some of the homes, when we did, at least we could get parents and caregivers to continue some of the work that we were doing and the remote learning as best as we could. But we knew the children and had a good feel for what they needed. This year, as 3 and 4-year-olds come into our programs, we were providing supports and services, education and clinical services for children we had never met. And I think, and that was true for all of the preschool providers throughout the country, certainly in the state of New York. And I think that became the biggest challenge. As we started to move into less remote learning and where students started to come in, but still with the social distancing requirements, there's none of our schools and almost none throughout the city are offering 5 days a week in-person education for these kids. So it's really been a challenge to get them all the supports and services that they need. Because the idea is, of course, for these kids that they go into public school kindergarten with their non-disabled peers. To do that, they need a lot of intensive service and clinical services and speech and occupational and physical therapy, particularly for some of the mobility impaired kids. And so that's been a real struggle. And their families, are struggling. Parents have to go to work and they're left with caregivers, or they have no idea what they're supposed to do. And of course, some of them we've had red zones and yellow zones and green zones, and sometimes school are in session and sometimes not. So it's been a really mishmash. And all of these kids essentially have lost a year. And we're just hoping that as they get to public school, as they leave our program, that they'll be able to do intensive services at the Department of Ed and sort of do a catch up. But that's really been a struggle. For adults, it's run the gamut. For those who live with us, it's been the isolation of having to stay home all the time. And, we've had some of our homes where we've had COVID outbreaks, and we've been very fortunate in being able to contain that. And our staff have been just wonderful in monitoring themselves and testing themselves and now getting vaccines, although that's still an issue. But for adults living at home who would attend our day programs, who had jobs, they've been lost. I mean, they've been staying home. They've been socially isolated. I mean, we've been going into the houses and doing as much as we can, but nothing takes the place, as you know, of getting out of the house and doing things with their peers and with their friends. And many of them can use, like we're doing right now, social media and Zoom and other things to connect with people, but many of them can't. And the sense of isolation, the loss of service, the loss of jobs, the loss of money, even for those, they were the first people to be laid off for those that had supported or other kinds of employment. So it's been really something. Now, fortunately, in the state of New York, the governor has put them to the front of the vaccine thing. So many of our folks have been vaccinated, although with some of our families and some of our staff, we're still facing fear and mistrust and the inability to get access to the vaccines. But we're really working.
How is that, Edward? How is that? Because you all should have been prioritized, that community. How is that? How are you still running into problems?
We were, Antwan, and being prioritized and having sufficient supply and getting access to it are two different things. And so, right now, I would say that the ramp up is still getting there. Since once we were prioritized, we were still waiting for a couple of weeks to get access to both the Pfizer, which required a huge amounts of refrigeration and freezing, and the Moderna vaccine,
Right.
which was a little more accessible. And now these other ones are coming on the market, which make it a little more easier. We've had, some of the pharmacies and so forth, and we have our own clinics that we're able to do distribution in. But, people have to get there. And I still think for folks who have mobility impairments, who can't take public transportation, who don't have access necessarily to all the accessorides and other things, that kind of access is still lagging behind the availability of the vaccine. But we're getting there.
How are you overcoming that? Are more literature? Are you having conversations? Like, how are you working through that?
All running the gamut. We've had our medical professionals, we've had the people of different ethnic backgrounds and who've had the vaccine, and some of the people some of the news people that we've interviewed, and telling people that this is really fine. Our own medical professionals, some of whom are minorities, have, and of course our own staff who've been taking the vaccine. We've been doing webinars and videos, and taking all of those kinds of things. And it's still a barrier, as you well know, Antwan, that is still hard to overcome throughout the country. So we're working on it. But these are some of the struggles that we have, and they're not close to being over. I mean, it's some of the folks that were working in employment and so forth, they're never going to get their jobs back, at least not the ones that they had. Of course, businesses, that they were in are still by and large suffering.
Thank you so much for what you're doing. We'll be sure to get the word out to make sure that people know. And again, stay safe, you and all the staff and the people that you're taking care of.
Thank you so much for having me, Antwan. It's good to see you again.